All presentations of the Conference of Consulting Actuaries are conducted in compliance with federal and state antitrust laws, and any discussion of anti-competitive activities among participants is strictly prohibited. I will now turn it over to Tanya Manning.
All right, thank you, Shannon, and welcome everyone to another panel discussion that is being sponsored by the Women in Consulting community of the Conference of Consulting Actuaries. This focus of today is going to be mentoring, as Shannon just mentioned, and that is based on the demand and comments that we've received from you, members of the community, in various different formats, and just our general understanding of the real importance of mentoring and how important it is to get that right. So I am Tanya Manning, and I have been part of the steering group that's been standing up and overseeing the women in consulting community since its inception. So I'm happy to see this next chapter in our book. On my day job, I am chief actuary and lead the wealth practice from the capital of humidity, I think, North Carolina, or Charleston, South Carolina is probably actually the real capital, and I was there last week. Nonetheless, coming to you from the South as a remote employee before remote was cool. So I also am the executive sponsor for Women Empowered at Buck within my company. So one of my passions in life is to improve our profession through diversity, equity, and inclusion, and with a particular emphasis for me on helping women achieve their whatever success means to them by giving them support and empowering them and giving them lots of resources, which is what we're here to do today. What we're going to do for the format is to focus on providing you some education. We have some really great material to share with you on very much focusing on just better education about what mentoring is and isn't and that type of thing. But we're going to add to that some good storytelling. And we have a great panel that I'll introduce in just a moment that will help you bring to life some of the information that's being shared. We want you to leave with some actionable items so you don't just hear some good discussions, get some ideas, but you know specifically how to apply them. We're going to have 30 minutes of a presentation mixed with 30 minutes of story. So it's going to be 60 minutes of that. We are allowing 15 minutes, and Jennifer told me that I could be confident we're going to have 15 minutes at the end for Q&A. So you can certainly use, communicate with us with your questions as we go through it, and we'll try to react if appropriate, but we will reserve some time at the end for some Q&A as well, and we hope you take advantage of that as well. Now, for our amazing panel, I am going to introduce them in alphabetical order, and our first person I will introduce is Jess Kosher, and she is a partner in Mercer's Wealth Business, and she's based in Pittsburgh, a city that I am familiar with and love. She's been there for 15 years. Jess has a particular knack for not only being a great actuary, but she's also a supervisor, coach, and advocate. And she has done a good amount of mentoring as well as being the recipient of some of these important relationships as well, including mentoring. So she'll have some great stories to share. And she's also part of the WIC steering committee or oversight group. Now, Jennifer Lewis is joining us, and you are going to get a lot of great information from her. She's a senior consultant in Willis Towers Watson, coming to us from St. Louis. Been in the business for 23 years, focusing on consulting in both DB, DC, retiree welfare, so she's all over the place. But she's also a member of Willis Towers Watson's Midwest Retirement Leadership Team. And very importantly, she's also part of their North American Retirement Women's Leadership Development Program. She's actually leading that, not just part of that. So she's going to have great information. Mary Moreland, she is an actuary by background, but Mary Moreland is now the Executive Vice President, Human Resources for Avid. And she leads the company's efforts to support and develop their employees, helping them support Avid's mission, but also live their own best possible lives. She joined Avid in 2011. Before that, she was she was a benefits consultant in healthcare, hospitals, and manufacturing. So she's got that background, and a lot of great experience to share as well. And a quote from Mary is, "My greatest satisfaction has come from seeing people I have managed or mentored grow and develop and be recognized for their achievements," which is beautiful. So we're happy to have Mary on the panel. Finally, we have Adrienne Ostrop, who I've gotten to know a little bit better this year. She is a principal and founder of Athena Actuarial Consulting, which is a certified woman-owned small business. She is a pension actuary specializing in what we call public plans, state, local, federal government entities. She worked for a couple of large consulting firms before that. She is passionate, and I know this for a fact, about empowering diverse teams to succeed with inclusive behaviors, mentorship, advocacy. And I'm looking forward to what she has to share. And she shares my passion for empowering women to have their own version of success, and is co-founder of Network of Actual Women and Allies. So look for them on LinkedIn. They have a lot of good information as well. I believe I've eaten up most of my time, actually maybe giving you a little bit spare time, Jennifer, as Jennifer's going to take it from here. I'll come back at the end if we have some time for some Q&A, which we are planning to. But for now, I'm going to sit back and enjoy, and hope you will as well, as we share a little bit of education, personal stories, and give you some tips on mentoring. So over to you, Jennifer.
Thanks, Tanya, and thank you all for joining us today. We hope this can be an interactive session. What we're planning to do is, I've got a few slides that we're going to walk through, but as we go, we're going to have some stories sprinkled in from each of our panelists throughout. And then if you would, please go ahead, if you already have questions, you go ahead and put them into the chat. And then as we go through, we might be able to take a few on particular topics as we're covering that topic. And then at the end, as Tanya said, we'll cover the rest of them. So to start us off here, we've got a cute picture. Hopefully it helps to make you smile a little bit, think back to the Jungle Gym days, but also makes an important point, two important points really, that I want to make sure we cover today. One is where have you come from and where are you going? And as we talk about mentorship and how to get mentors, how to keep mentors, how to become a mentor yourself, what's really important is knowing where you want to go. You can get mentors that will help you definitely along the way, but still you're charting your path. And so it's really important that you're in control of where you want to go with your career. The reality is these days that the average tenure of an employee is 4 years. So a lot of employees may have 10 to 20 jobs in the course of their career. For some of us who've been a long time at one employer, maybe you haven't gone to 10 or 20 different places, but you've played a lot of different roles over time. And so being able to set what's important to you, where you really want to go next, that really is a responsibility that lies with you as you go forward. And I think now we've got the Jungle Gym reference in most of our minds about the way a career goes, right? Careers aren't as linear and straight as they used to be. There's a lot of moving around, sometimes sideways, sometimes take a step back for a minute to take a step forward, particularly for women, as you've got a lot of different maybe personal commitments that you're juggling as well as the professional ones. So that's something to keep in mind right off the bat. So then if you'll advance this forward. So what is mentoring? Everybody's probably got their own idea of what we're talking about with mentoring. It's basically the sharing of knowledge and experience between two people with the idea of trying to advance your learning and development. And as we think about that, I really think of it as being more of a long-term basis. So we'll talk in a minute about coaching versus mentoring. Mentoring is really looking at where you want to go in your career. Even maybe it's 2 years, maybe it's 5 years, but it's not so much in the moment. It's thinking about where you want to head going forward. And one of the things to keep in mind is a lot of times a mentor should be outside of your direct line and the direct path that you're on currently. So it's not a manager. It's not somebody who is directly reviewing your performance, for example. We at Willis Towers Watson, we try to make sure that isn't the case, that if you're going to be working with a mentor, it's someone who isn't in a position like that. So it's someone with an outside perspective who can help you with something different than the people in your direct line. Okay. So if we go forward one more, I mentioned this a second ago. I think there's often some confusion about the different roles that someone may play. And lately, there's been a lot of conversations about sponsors and how to get sponsors and why you want sponsors. And we're focused on mentoring today. So we want to take a minute and really highlight the differences between the three. You know, when I think about a coach, and often it might be your manager, but you might have coaches separate from your manager too. And the coach is really more focused on today. What are you doing? What situations are you working on today? And how can you adjust those situations? When we think about a mentor, it's really more about helping navigate your career beyond the challenge you might be having today, but what about that long-term career? And really a lot of the responsibility for a mentoring relationship lies with the person, because you are in control of where your career goes, as I mentioned earlier, and so that really sits with you. When we think then about a sponsor, it's a different type of idea. Really, a sponsor is a senior leader who has strong influence, who might be able to help someone pull forward in their career. So the balance of responsibility shifts a little bit between a mentor and a sponsor, because the sponsor is really trying to bring someone along in a certain way there. So I think, you know, there's positives to all of these. There's, you know, you really, the more support you can have, the better. But they all have a particular role to play. And Mary, let's start with you. I think you've had some experience with both mentor and sponsor roles. Maybe you can help flesh that out.
Sure. Thanks, Jennifer. And before I get into the some of my stories, I first want to compliment the CCA and the Women in Consulting for putting on this panel. I think it's a great idea, and I think we'll hopefully leave here with a lot of great information and some to-dos for everyone who's listening. So thank you, and then special thanks to Tanya for inviting me to join the panel. So I agree with you, Jennifer. I think there's a lot of confusion about sponsors and mentors and what seems like you want a sponsor, but how do you get a sponsor, and what is the difference? And as a mentor and a sponsor, both, I think of them as, from my perspective, as what is the end goal? So when I'm a sponsor, the end goal is for me to help that individual reach their full potential within the organization through my understanding what their traits are, what they're good at, and what their aspirations are, and then using my influence within the organization to really make sure that that person is noticed, gets on all the right succession plans, and has the right ability to be considered for the right kinds of roles. Whereas as the mentor, similarly, I want them to achieve their career goals, but it's more me helping to kind of nudge them, help that act more as a sounding board, help them understand what are the options that they might consider. I define success less in that role with this person ultimately gets the job that they're looking for, and more with just the personal relationship that we have created. I'll give you a couple of examples. I'm a sponsor for someone within the organization today. I don't meet with them every week or every month. We talk maybe quarterly, but early on we had a lot of conversations to understand what are her aspirations, where does she want to go, and then I talked with her as well as many people who work with her to understand what are her positive attributes, what are the things that she needs to work on, and then really understanding what does it take for her to get to that next level. So it's more us talking to get to know one another, but then me checking in to see how she's progressing, not just with her, but with others in the organization. But ultimately, my job as her sponsor is to make sure that as those roles that she aspires to come open, she's one of the people on the slate to be considered. Contrast that with a mentoring relationship I had where it was someone relatively new to our organization. She was really just looking for some help in navigating and understanding how things fit together. Hadn't even really begun to think about what might be next for her. And she was presented with an opportunity, going back to your first slide with the jungle gym versus the ladder. She was really focused on the ladder. The opportunity was a jungle gym, kind of came from left field for her, and she really wasn't sure how to think about the opportunity. So she and I had several conversations during the course of that process to talk about what she might learn from the new opportunity, how it might help her for the future. It was really kind of helping her to think about the different paths. And ultimately she decided to take the side step on the jungle gym. And now she's at a very different point in the ladder than she would have been otherwise. But it was, my role there was really to help her think through why that new opportunity, which seemed to be coming out of the blue, would be good for her.
Right. That's really helpful to hear that differentiation in the two different roles there. Adrian, what would you add?
Thanks, Jennifer. Yeah, I think it's really interesting to hear your perspective, Mary, because I could talk a little bit about my point of view as having gone through experiences, especially at larger firms, having a manager, mentor, and sponsor all at the same time. I think it's really critical. It was for me to understand the value of each type of relationship. There was a lot of talk, I think, beginning a couple of years ago about the value of sponsorship, and it was confusing to me. Does it replace mentorship? How can you use both in your career? And I think that it's in my confusion, it was important for me to define what the relationship was that I had with each of these individuals. Sometimes you didn't need to define anything explicitly because the individual was defined as your manager. But when it comes to mentorship for sponsorship, I thought it was really important to clarify what exactly I wanted out of that relationship with that individual. Even though it was maybe awkward in solidifying those relationships in the beginning, I think it really set me up for success. I'll talk about a specific story at a larger firm that I worked at when I was going up for promotion to manager, which was a particularly big leap at that point. I'd been an experienced hire a couple years before and been told that this jump may be a bit premature. I had specifically outlined the relational roles that I knew I needed to get to that next level. I knew I needed a sponsor, a mentor. I needed specific qualities in my coach or manager. At the time, I kept hearing from my coach that my desire to advance that quickly was really premature. And I personally was like, no, you're not going to be my coach anymore. So if I couldn't get a real reason for why it was premature, other than this is just what people do, it didn't feel right to me. And so I set up calls with individuals and found a coach who was really supportive of my desire to advance, and just got that for me, it was either I was going to go up or at least get really actionable feedback as to why I wasn't ready. So that coach was the first step, that formal role as defined by the firm. For my sponsor, I specifically found a leader in my organization who was really influential in the practice. They were the lead of that practice at the time. And I knew they would be in the room and would be an advocate for my success when it came down to that promotion. And I specifically selected the leader who I knew would benefit himself from my promotion. It would help him meet his goals, and that when he was in the room and able to say I was growing this practice, and when in talking about his own performance, my advancement aligned with that. So I knew he'd be selflessly motivated, of course, as well, but I think that it was really good. It aligned with his own success. And lastly, the mentor that I had solidified really pursued a different path from me, but acted as the honest, supportive sounding board. And I think, like Mary was saying, it really is was more nurturing than the sponsorship or even the coach, in that they were really, this is what you want, here's how you're going to get it. It was important to me that the mentor was a woman, because I felt like she understood how to navigate that organization as a woman, with there being so few in our particular group. And I think that, like you were saying with the jungle gym versus ladder, she was really good at making sure I checked in, that I wasn't just trying to get ahead, but it really was the career that I wanted. So I think the combination of those individuals was really important, but the mentorship was critical in making sure that I continued to check in and take that step back and just grew a personal relationship with that person.
And kudos to Adrienne. I think she's more organized than some of us probably have been in our careers about thinking about all of the mentors and sponsors that we may want going forward. So if you aren't in that place yet, that's quite all right. We're all trying to figure it out as we go. So, and Jessica, I think could you talk a little bit about why you think it's important to have both, or to consider both?
Yeah, definitely. And I love seeing these roles separated out on a piece of paper, so I can give you a firsthand experience of mine personally, of how this is really important to know who's in each of these roles for you, but really who do you need to be in each of these roles for you? So my example was from several years ago, and I was going up for a promotion. And so I had a supervisor, my manager, who was doing a really great job of making sure that I was achieving the goals that I needed to, be considered for the promotion and meeting all of those key attributes. I had several mentors that I counted on to really help get me opportunities, think about my long-term goals and what I was trying to achieve, and talk through that with them. And so as I went in to the promotion experience, I ended up not getting promoted. And the reason that my manager came back with was that not enough people, so the sponsors, not enough sponsors in the room knew me. So I didn't have credibility with the sponsors yet at that point. And for me, that was a real light bulb. So I wish I had this slide 5 years ago to be able to look at it in hindsight, but it was a light bulb to really help me see a gap in a gap that I needed to address. So what I did then was rely back on my mentors. How do I gain those sponsorships? Can they help me give examples or find ways for me to connect with those sponsors or even get involved in a project from those sponsors to help me build those very necessary relationships. And so I think having that mentor be in the middle of this page is really critical, because I do think they're such an important link between our direct manager that we have and then the sponsors that are needed, that are the ones making ultimate decisions sometimes for our careers. So good to report, though, the year after, once I was able to build all those relationships, I did get the promotion. But again, just an example of how you can really work through that and the real importance, I think, that a mentor has.
Yeah, and I think what you said there is really important. And the reality is, most of the times, the sponsors that are in the room are very few, right? I mean, you're talking at senior levels that decisions are getting made, and it might not be that you're going to have a really deep relationship with that person, but there may be mentors that can help you figure out what relationships you have and really help you to understand those folks, even understand the political landscape and how decisions are getting made. And I think that's a really key role, because there's not going to be that many people in the room, and there's only so many people they're going to sponsor. Right? Okay, well, we want to make sure that everybody is awake and with us. So we have a little poll question, and it should have popped up on your screen here now. What do you want, or what have you gained from a mentoring relationship? Multiple choice, I believe you can select multiple of them as well, so please do that. We don't have any Jeopardy hold music or anything for us. So.
You don't want me to hum it.
And we don't want to start a conversation about who's going to lead it. All right. Okay. So there we have our responses back. So we've got some variety in here. Very interesting. So ideas to deal with the current challenge and advice to grow my skills are at the top of the list. Still helping get a promotion or finding a new job and navigating the organization. Fewer for introduction to new contacts. I think that's interesting, because you really can, and we'll talk later about mentors within or outside of your direct area. Certainly they can help you with new contacts in there as well. And when I think about mentoring, I really think the middle three of these are right in the sweet spot of mentoring. When I think about the first one and the last one, mentors can definitely help. So can others. So as we were just talking about some of those other pieces, help getting a promotion. A lot of times you are going to want to be thinking about your manager and how they help you in that process. Certainly we've talked about sponsors and current challenges. Mentors can help you there. And so can some of your other day-to-day coaches. Okay. All right, so we're going to shift gears just a little bit now and talk about roles for both mentors and mentees. So if we start with mentees, as I mentioned up front, really the mentoring responsibility really lies with the mentees start. So taking ownership of your own development is really important. At the same time, being open to feedback. You're purposely getting into a relationship to try to grow and do something different than what you're doing. And so you need to be open to feedback and ideas from a mentor. And then being willing to try things. When we've got a women's coaching program going on, and one of the criteria for picking people that were going to be part of it was people who are open to doing something new. Because if you're not going to be open to doing something new, then it's kind of a waste of time, honestly. You've got to be willing to try something that's a little outside of your comfort zone. And being honest about your goals and your needs, certainly important part of it. And then really just proactively managing that relationship. On the mentor side, certainly providing support, and that support might look different. I can tell you, I've got some relationships going on now where I'm mentoring some women, and since we've been in the COVID environment, it's a different relationship. What they're needing from an outside support right now sometimes is a shoulder to cry on, frankly. There's a lot of challenges going on, and maybe they need a different support at different times. Certainly sharing your knowledge and experience, and also sometimes your contacts, and being willing to help introduce them and help them understand, what kind of the surrounding people who might be important to their path in the long term. Helping mentees overcome barriers as well. And then of course there's some shared responsibilities. And I think the biggest part about this is trying to create a safe space. If you'll click one more time there, you really are trying to build a safe space where you have trust and confidence between the two of you. One of my best mentors was actually also my manager, and male. But one of the things he was really good at was he would create a safe space where I could come and say, here's something I'm dealing with. What do you think about various approaches to it? And we could have a great conversation about it. And at the end, I might end up doing something very different than what he would have done. But he was fine with that. Once I left that room, I knew there was not going to be judgment from him about which way I went. It was a real safe space where we could have that conversation. I could try out different ideas, get a different perspective, and then move forward without fearing that there was going to be some flashback from him. So I think that's a really important thing to consider too, is just how do you create that kind of a relationship? Okay. So what makes a good mentor on the next page? Good mentors, first of all, a willingness to commit some time. I know as Mary mentioned, one of her people, they meet quarterly. We a lot of times will say, think about doing at least an hour a month, just so that you have some continuity, particularly in the beginning of a relationship. And I think Mary mentioned that in the beginning, we spend a lot of time together to understand each other. And then it's sort of a maintenance mode, maybe doesn't need quite as much, but mentor needs to be willing to invest that time and have some sincere interest in trying to grow someone. And the interpersonal communication skills and that ability to listen, I think, is probably the most important thing. You need somebody who's going to try to help you figure things out, but not going to tell you exactly what to do. That's really what you're looking for there, and a willingness and patience to provide that guidance and coaching. And then just building that inclusive environment that we talked about before. On the mentee side, what makes a good mentee? So of course, that willingness to invest the time as well. But upfront, really figuring out what your goals are and what you're really trying to accomplish out of that relationship. I'll say that one more time and then I'll quit. But I think that's a really important one to have on there. And discussing, with managers what makes sense. Should you be in a formal program? Are there various programs that you should consider to be part of that? Being open to that feedback that we talked about before, and then following through on what you say you're going to do. I think just making sure that you're willing to really take the time and make sure that it's a good experience. Mentors usually have some altruistic reason for being a mentor, but they also want it to be a good use of their time. We're all busy, especially in the consulting industry. We're all busy, right? So you want it to be a good use of the time that you're sharing there. So maybe then to just kind of compare and contrast a little bit. Adrienne, why don't we start with you? What's your experience been as you've been moving from being a mentee to a mentor, and how would you judge the comments I just made on the last couple of pages?
Yeah, I would say like right now I'm in that middle phase where I feel like I'm equal times amount of time mentor, equal amount of times mentee, especially as I was at a larger firm and was in the formal coaching role and informal mentorship role. As I've left those firms and started Athena, I think a lot about this and how I'll develop the resources that I'm bringing in. And I think that as a mentee, I recognized the pivotal moments where somebody essentially changed the course of my career and what set the stage for that being possible. A lot of it is what you've raised, that we had at least we had invested the time in getting to know each other, and they knew what my long-term goals were, but also just knew me personally, my tendencies. I think like my tendency to over go on overdrive if I'm stressed out, and I need to be told to take a step back, just really those types of things. And that I trusted them. So I was open to getting that feedback. And I think that they didn't even realize that it was in those moments where it was like the lowest of lows or those really big highs, that it was those moments where they showed up that really made all the difference and created those moments for me in my career. Some specific moments that stuck with me in a way that I try to replicate as a mentor, and I think about a lot are, one was, going through some personal situation. My grandmother had unexpectedly been moved to hospice, and I was going on overdrive at work to try to distract myself. And a mentor who I'd known for several years stepped in to really shake me into my own reality, that the pension valuation would get done or it wouldn't, but it didn't really matter. In that moment, it really needed to be about me and my family. And they knew that I had a tendency to over focus on work when things or personal things were calling. So I think that moment was great because it helped me reassess my own priorities. And it also just gave me permission to step away without feeling like I was letting the team down. Another specific moment being where somebody was really a sounding board and offered a level of secrecy or protection where it was clear they were more loyal to me than the company we worked at. And that was really important because even as I revealed that I was considering leaving because I couldn't find my path at that particular place, they were not like, they weren't as protective of the company. It was protective of my best interest. And in the end, I did stay at the firm. They helped me find a path that I was able to continue to learn and grow. And while I did eventually leave the firm to start Athena, that individual helped me figure out what I was looking for and how to chart that path. And I think that eventually, when there's no perfect reality when it comes to where you work, and you have to put in the hard work to make the best of your situation. But when I did eventually leave, it was to run towards something as opposed to kind of running away. So I think as I become a mentor and in that role, I really strive to be both fiercely protective of that individual, especially if they can't protect themselves in a situation, and make sure that it's clear that my loyalty is to them, even over the company we work for. In the end, I think it does help retention because especially for me, I felt like I had advocates that were looking for my best interest and not just trying to convince me to stay at a particular company. And so that it definitely worked out for me. But I think that both of those qualities really offer that psychological safety that you will need, is not if, but when, whether it's a personal situation that's come up or a big change that you're considering making.
Yeah, so there's some great insights in there for sure. And Jessica, I think you also have a story of leveraging a mentor.
Yeah, happy to share it. So this is going back a little bit early in my career. And I had worked on a few client teams with one of our senior consultants at the firm. And so, of course, in that type of relationship, we were, meeting, there was projects, talking about the client. But then one put on my calendar, just a lunch, and the title was catch up. So So I didn't know what it was, because usually when we have meetings, they were very distinctly set to talk about projects and certain things. So when I went over to ask him, I was like, oh, I certainly enjoy having lunch, but just curious to, what the context was. And what he came back and said was, well, I was told by the executive leadership team that I need to mentor you. And so we both laughed, and it turned into funny. But then what happened was we both went all in. And honestly, it ended up turning into one of my most impactful mentors that I ever had in my entire career. And we did establish a cadence, some regular catch-up cadence, usually monthly. It felt about right. And what we did was we both came pretty prepared. So I came with the questions that I had. Most of the time, we didn't talk about the clients we worked on at all. We were really focused on, the bigger picture, a lot of, my career development, listening to his stories on, things that he did good and bad during his career that I could learn from as well too. And one thing that I had done with the relationship was every time we ended up meeting, I always made sure to ask the question, what's one thing that you think I could do better? And again, like most people, I love to get the good feedback, right? The praises and told that I'm doing a good job, but I knew to really grow, I needed to become more self-aware. And so getting those constructive points, and the good thing was that I had a trusting mentor that, certainly didn't deliver those in a derogatory way by any means, which is very important, but it was in a growth manner. So what can I do better to help me grow and get to the next item that's in my career goals?
I think that's such a key one, and we should be asking that question to as many people as we can, right? Sometimes it's hard when you get that feedback, but one of the things that I've been noticing since the virtual environment is there's not that drive back from a client meeting, and those were the best times to give feedback to each other, and even as the senior person on the team to say, okay, what do you guys think I could have done better in that meeting? But there was so much coaching that goes on in that moment driving back, and now we don't have that. So it's like, okay, I need to call somebody immediately after that call, and still try to do those things. So I think that's a really important point. Mary, I think you've had some variety of experiences from the mentor perspective in terms of how mentees have approached the mentorship. So what can you tell us there?
Sure. And maybe just one point of clarification, Jennifer, because I agree with you in a mentor-mentee relationship, monthly is probably the right cadence. When I was talking about quarterly, it was for sponsorship. So just to clarify that. Yeah. So I was thinking about what makes a good mentee, and the theme that keeps coming back to me is just the clarity on what they're focused on. What are they trying to get out of the relationship? Because I'm happy to serve as the mentor regardless, but I want to understand what's their goal, and then how you show up to your mentor really depends upon what your goal is. So if I contrast two people that I've mentored, one was an engineer. So she and I didn't know each other well. We have an internal online mentor matching tool. And so we were matched online. And so she came to me with very specific questions. I'm thinking about X. I'm not sure how to navigate Y, but always very prepared, very much an agenda. And after about 6 months, the nice thing was that after we went through her agenda, we actually could have more of a conversation. So it became, at first, I have these questions. I'm looking for some, a sounding board. I'm looking for some help in navigation. But then we established some bonds of trust, and we got to a place where we could just have a conversation, even about things with her kids. And that's actually something I would say to everyone, that one of the best mentor relationships that I had, it started as very much a work relationship, but it became more about how do I navigate being a consultant at the time and having little kids, and how do I prioritize, and how do I quit feeling so guilty? So if you're looking for a mentor, like, find someone who can help you with those kinds of things too, if that's something you're challenged with. So she was super prepared. It took us a while to get to the right spot. I contrast that with another person who also matched online. We hit it off like within the first 10 minutes, just talk. We had lots that we could talk about. She was actually new to the country. And this is when I was still new to the company. And so we had a kind of all right away, we trusted each other because we were both new in something. And so we had a great relationship because of that. And in a way that was, I know we'll talk about it a little later, but it was almost reverse mentoring in the sense that she had been at the company a long time. So she was very good at kind of helping me to understand how all the pieces of this very large puzzle fit together. And I could help her with navigating how we worked in the States versus how we worked where she had lived before. But both of them, the focus really for me, like what made the good was it was very clear what they wanted, and they drove the conversations, and they came prepared at least to have a few topics to cover.
Yeah. And I think that's good advice for a mentee coming in is, have some situation you want to talk about. Once you start there, it'll go in lots of directions, right? But if you have something that you're looking for advice or a conversation on to begin, that's gonna make it so much easier. And that goes for every time you meet, really. Have something in particular in mind, because sometimes you may be closer to those mentors, like Jessica's situation where it's a senior consultant she's working with, but some mentors may be outside of your group. For example, you might want somebody in a different line of business, or somebody who's more on the client relationship side instead of consulting in your area and things like that. And so their knowledge level of what you're doing on a day-to-day basis could vary a lot. And so even more so as you get into some of those that are a little further removed from what you're doing day to day, you're really going to have to help them understand where you're going. Okay, great. So let's talk a little bit about how to find a mentor. And I'll just remind you at this point, we would like to have your questions coming in. If you're not familiar with Zoom, I believe if you just move your mouse around a little bit, you'll see that ribbon show up at the bottom. There's a little Q&A down there. Just click that Q&A and it'll give you a place to type those in. So when we talk about finding a mentor, I think first off is determining what type of mentoring you're looking for. And we're going to talk about some a little bit different types of mentoring here in a minute. But, are you looking for somebody more in your direct line to help you moving right up the line? Are you looking more for someone who might have a softer set of skills and you're trying to round out your softer set of skills instead of, your direct technical expertise, something like that? Or you think you might want to move in a different area and you're looking for more advice about broader careers? I think that it's really important to figure out what you are really looking for there and what you want from that mentor. Don't overlook your own network, at least as a starting point to branch in one level further, right? We all think about the 7 degrees or 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, or just your LinkedIn contact list these days. Who else is out there that who may be connected to someone who could really help you? And don't be afraid to talk to your managers, local leaders, your peers about that, and to really help with that. There are a lot of creative ways out there to do it now. Mary mentioned an online way. I know our firm is piloting something like that as well, where there's an online way to match up mentors. But there's a lot of different ways that you can do it, and we'll talk about some of those resources at the end. And thinking outside of your organization, certainly what community organizations, professional networks, folks that you knew from the past, and really do that. And don't be afraid to leverage some folks in order to get to the others. So we did have a question come in now, thank you, about online mentoring matching that we're referring to. Mary, do you want to talk a little bit about the service that you're using?
Sure. So what I was referring to is something that we had built at Abbott, 10 years ago or so. We still use today. That is basically, if I want to be a mentor, I put my profile into a system. Someone's looking for a mentor. They put in a few things that they're interested in, and the system looks for commonalities and matches people up. And then it's up to the mentee, whether they want to go looking for that particular mentor. But it gives you a sense of background and right up front. Now, funny enough, after I've moved into this job, no one seems to want to be mentored by the head of HR. So it's I kind of have to go after them in a different way than I used to. It's a little different situation.
That's funny. And there may be multiple technologies, and I'm definitely not endorsing this one. I have not used it myself, but I know one that's being talked about more now is a technology called a Mentor Click, Mentor CLIQ. And that I've heard of that one, which I think that maybe helps an organization to do just what you're talking about. So it's a technology to help enable that if an organization wants to use it. So I apologize, I don't have more level of detail about that, but maybe that's a place to start if you want to look at that one. Okay, so then moving on, I mentioned we would talk about some different areas of mentoring. Just as everything about our jobs is changing, I think the way that mentoring works is changing. And so we wanted to mention a few different ways to think about mentoring. And part of the idea here is a mentoring situation does not necessarily have to be a long-term relationship. It could be shorter, it could be more topic-based. There's various ways to do it, especially in the environment we're in, where things are just moving very quickly. So subject matter expert mentoring, I think, is pretty self-explanatory there. If you're looking for help in a particular area, can you get hooked up with someone to get some expert advice in that area? And I think one important thing about mentors is that they create long-term networks for you, right? So if you have a mentor, you do something short-term with them, they still become part of your network as long as you maintain, handle that relationship well and maintain it to some degree going forward. So getting hooked up with a subject matter expert is never a bad thing from that perspective. And that goes along with my core mentoring too. Is there a particular situation where you're looking for some help and maybe you can get someone to help with that? I can say personally, anytime that someone has asked me for help and I've done something like that, I do feel a long-term investment in that person, and I enjoy that. And, Mary's purpose statement from earlier of, then I love to see them grow and prosper in that area. And so while you are asking for someone for a favor, it also, it comes back to them and they're going to love being able to kind of know what you're doing. So don't be afraid to ask for those, especially when they're short-term commitments. It's good to try those out. Mentoring circles have been more popular recently. It's more of a peer-to-peer thing. So thinking a little bit more about groups of people who maybe have a common interest, but maybe can help each other in different ways. I think that's just a really unique way of trying to think about how can I get a circle of people to help and I can help them at the same time. The one that's been getting the most publicity, I would say, lately is reverse mentoring. So this is the idea of having a more junior person really help a senior person in an area that they're less familiar with. So with the the enhanced focus on inclusion and diversity over the last 18 months, I think this has become more and more prevalent, and more companies are trying something like this. So is there for a senior leader who frankly are more older white men, right? Can they get a more junior person who doesn't look the same as them, who can maybe help them to see where they might have blind spots? And personally, I'm a big fan of this. I can tell you that our North American retirement leader has one, and he would tell you that it's been immensely valuable for him. I think the thing to be careful about here is you're asking a lot out of that mentor then, because you're asking them to really be open in some uncomfortable conversations potentially with someone who's much more senior than them. And Tanya's shaking her head there. I don't know, Tanya, if you have any perspective you'd like to give on that. This is not planned, but I think it's just really something to keep in mind.
I think that is something really important. One of the things I struggle with as a leader is getting that real feedback and that real line of input on how you're doing. So getting someone who both has the insight and also brave enough to provide that information, I can't tell you how valuable that is for me, because every day I want to figure out how to do my job better. Someone asked me, like, how do you learn? Who do you learn from? And I was like, well, I learn as much from the people giving me feedback who are part of the practice as, the people who are in the executive level at my company. I crave that information. And I think this reverse mentoring is a wonderful way to get that. It can only make you better, but it does take that right person who's both insightful and brave. So,
yeah. Yeah, and maybe that's something to think about if you're looking for a mentor is also, but can I help that person in some way? Can I give some of that feedback, some of that insight? I personally am not very good with technology and pieces like that too, and keeping on top of what is new. And I love any mentoring relationship where somebody can just like keep me from being the old lady who doesn't know what's going on in the world either. So, there's various.
Maybe I struggle with Microsoft Teams. I don't know. I'm just saying, maybe that's me. So yeah, I hear what you're saying. Better at
Yeah.
ProVal, I think.
There can be definitely a value given from a lot of different perspectives there. So, okay. And then I think we're kind of coming around to the last of our organized slides here. Just wanted to wrap up a little bit with some kind of next steps. We promised some actionable items here, and we really want to provide them both from the mentor and the mentee perspective. So Shannon, if you'll take us one slide further. So there we go. Thank you. So I think we've talked a lot about the ones on the mentor side, determining what type of mentoring you need and knowing what you want from the mentor. Don't be afraid to leverage your network and your peers in order to do that. Recognizing that your mentor doesn't have to be within your company and definitely not within your specific line. I can tell you the leadership development program that I'm leading now, we purposely look for people who are different from each other. We look for people outside of their direct line, outside of their location, and who actually have complementary skills rather than the same skills. So, if you're a perfectionist down to the last bit, we want somebody who's more of a big picture thinker, right? You should really look for some folks sometimes who are different than yourself. Of course, being prepared for your interactions with that mentor, and making sure that your manager knows what you're doing too. I think that's really important so that they can support you in that, and that get that accountability that comes from others knowing what you're trying to accomplish with the mentor. On the mentor side, just some ideas here as well, defining what you're trying to accomplish as well. Are you strictly trying to give back, or are you trying to promote mentorship within your own company? What are you really trying to accomplish, and let that lead where you're going to go. And you don't necessarily always have to start a new program. You can be a part of a program that's already out there and look for ways that you can do that as well. Building on your current relationships, and I already talked about complementary, not the same. Mary, I'm going to talk about this point, but I think you had really mentioned it as well when we were talking earlier. Start with a pilot. Don't feel like you have to completely go into something that's for a super long term and develop something huge in your company that that's going to encompass a whole lot of people. Start with a small group and see how you can go, and then have an exit strategy if it's not working out, or you just need to move on, making sure that from the beginning that it's clear, okay, we're going to have a check-in point at this time, and if things aren't working, or maybe they are and they've served their purpose, to make sure you have some exit strategy there. Yeah. Anything you'd add to that, Mary?
I completely agree. I absolutely think any of these types of endeavors, right? You sort of try, you test, and you adjust accordingly. For example, a few years ago, we started mentoring circles, and we weren't sure how they would go. I led one with one of our scientists, and it was on stakeholder management. And so we had 2 discussions around stakeholder management. We kind of went into it thinking like we'd read a book on stakeholder management, become a book club on stakeholder management. We had 2 calls. We could barely get to all the questions that people had. We decided we did not need a book. What we really needed was just more focus on various aspects of stakeholder management. Because we're a really large matrix organization, a lot of times, you don't have positional authority. And so you have to understand how to influence. And that really became the theme. So it started off one way, went another, but across the board, those mentoring circles were really successful because you got this group of people who were sort of all interested in one thing together, and the conversations morphed, but they also over time established a bond of trust. We kind of said like what happens here stays here. No one shares anything. But we've continued to evolve those mentoring circles as we've learned more. And it's a great example. We tried 2, and now I don't know how many we have, but we have many, many.
Yeah. Yeah, that is a great example. And I think that gets to the last couple of points that were on the list here of establishing trust first, right? That's going to be important in any mentoring relationship. And then just really developing those communication and relationship skills to make sure that you can manage and maintain that relationship. I think it's actually a great way to grow your relationship skills. To sometimes it's hard to be in a mentoring situation and not tell people what to do. It's like, well, I know how I would do it, but you're really trying to help them see how to do it within their own style. And so it can be a good exercise for all of us, I think. So Tanya, right now, I'm not seeing other questions that have come in. I don't know if you are.
Well, we can also yeah, we'll open it up now for any questions that folks might have. I have some questions that I have jotted down, so maybe this will inspire some others to share theirs as well. One of the things we talked about was if you're a good practice for a mentee is to be clear, have a clear idea of what you want. And I think that's lovely. However, I've had situations where the mentee doesn't really know what they want. They just know that they need some assistance in moving forward. So it becomes not as much mentoring them to achieve their goals, but helping them define their goals. And I didn't know if anyone could speak to that, if that had happened to them, and how if they have any particular ideas of how to not just help someone achieve what they want, but to define their way, so to speak.
I can jump in. So I think that's spot on. And I think evolving goals is a natural item. So I do think it's important that a mentor, and when you are mentoring, that you're challenging the thought process, right? Is someone wanting that next item just because that's what they're supposed to do next? Or is it what they want to do and what they're passionate about doing? And I think that's where a mentor can really help ask those questions and make the person really think about their career, their next steps, and what they mean. And what they can get out of, again, the jungle gym, right? Or are you ready to go left, right, or up? And that isn't the same answer all the time.
And since I'm the one who's pushed that point several times, I will clarify in there too. I think what you're asking is a really important question. What you want could be help figuring out what I want in my career, right? I'm struggling with what the career paths are. That's what we hear a lot of times. I don't understand what the career paths are and which ways I could go. And that's a great place for a mentor to be able to help too.
Yeah. So sometimes I'm asked the question, should I get my ASA or FSA? And another manager said, never ask Tanya Manning that question, because he's always going to say, get your FSA. But, I try not to have the answer already ready and try to explore that. But I think that's really a challenge, I think, especially in the pension area where, we get folks who have so many variety of great skills and they can go many different directions. So it's, you don't want to always just say, get your FSA next, and, what's your next question? So it's a little challenging for me because I do feel passionate about that, but you're right. Another question I had was back to what Adrienne mentioned, where she was wanting to get to the next level. And she was like, nope, we have a timeline and you have to clock in so many years before you get to the next level. And been there, done that, understand that. However, I've also been in the point where I've been mentoring or coaching or, different relationships where people are really overshooting, frankly. They are just they're trying to be something that they're really not ready for. Don't know if anyone has experience in being in that position or coaching someone through that. I think that's another thing to try to make someone self-aware, maybe, to use Jess's. I don't know if that's exactly what it is, but that seems to be more of an issue than I was expecting in dealing with folks. Anybody had any experience with that or thoughts on that?
I had some experience with that. I think that in that particular situation, it taught me that when it was me who was being told it wasn't even that you're not ready, but here's the timeline. I learned the right questions that I should be asking. And when I went to the other individuals to try and find a different coach, they really wanted to know what was going on. And I had a great personal relationship with my coach, but it was really more about I really wanted to get that actionable feedback to get to the next level. So that was more what I was seeking than getting to the next promotion. So I think when the tables were turned, and especially when there were maybe less promotions than normal during 2020, with everything going on with the pandemic, I think that I made sure that the individuals who I knew from conversations that it was very unlikely that they would get to the next level. But even in that environment, I really wanted to make sure that it was actionable as to why they weren't, not just, oh, there's only 3 spots and you're not one of the 3. So I think that when I did find that really were pushing and I felt, if I don't get this, I'm just going to leave. It was kind of, I wanted to make sure that when I turned around and gave them the feedback, it wasn't just placing blame on the company saying, oh, they're just, they're not really giving me a lot of good intel, and you're just not going to get promoted. The pushback was giving really actionable, here are the ways you can be ready for the next level when it is your time. And I think next year would be a really good time to try again. Yeah. And that worked well. But in some of the situations, I think, it's not always well received, and that's really hard when you want somebody to succeed. But at the end of the day, if someone's not ready for a promotion, it's a disservice for them to actually get it anyway, if they're not ready for it.
And I think in those situations, as a mentor, it's important that you have enough information to be able to support the decision, to support and reinforce the messages, and hopefully reinforce it's not that we don't want you here. It's not that we don't see all of your success. It's that we need to see these other things. And a lot of times I think it's hard to be able to articulate what else you want to see. And that's a hard conversation, but a mentor can be really critical there to help reinforce the messages from the manager directly.
There's a lot of research now too, showing that women get less actionable feedback than men, and persons of color get even much less than there. And so, being able to get that feedback and really be able to understand how to move forward from that, I think is really important. And you do have to ask for it, and then you have to be willing to take it, and really, be open to hearing what they have to say. And I think it's something we all have to continue to work on, and mentors can be in a great situation to be able to provide that. Sometimes maybe even talking to the manager or other people they're working with to understand what do they need to be working on if you're not directly working with them every day, where you don't know as directly, but being able to provide some of that feedback is really important.
Great. One more question, if you'll allow me. I think we still have time. Is we talked a lot about the system that Abbott has put in place. It sounds like Willis Towers Watson has a system. I imagine Mercer does. Adrian's in a small firm. So I'm not sure how wide the mentoring network can work. And so but not just for those who work for smaller firms, but across the board. What is anyone's perspective on getting a mentor outside your company? That, is there a lot, is that perhaps less valuable, more valuable? When might that be appropriate? Because I do think that sometimes getting someone who knows what you do, but isn't part of the internal system, so to speak, can provide a different, or maybe even a more objective perspective. So any reflections on that from anyone?
Yeah, so I do have, I do work for a firm that does have a lot of, resources, et cetera, but the diversity of your relationships, I think, is so critical. And it is very important. And I've gone through times in my career where, I got opinions from those inside my firm, different lines of business, but I wanted an independent opinion. I wanted to be able to talk to someone I trusted outside of work, even outside of the actuarial profession, and run the situation by them and say, here's what the directions I think I could go. What would you do? Or what do you think about this? And I think that is absolutely critical to get diverse thinking and thoughts.
Right. How did you go about doing that? Was that just through your personal network? And maybe Adrienne can share how she would recommend someone in a smaller firm that necessarily needs to do that. But how did you do that, Jess?
Yep. So mine was through a personal network. And again, going back to one of the biggest items I think that's important in these relationships is trust. So it was through personal network and someone that I definitely trusted.
Mm-hmm.
I think it is difficult in a smaller firm. I mean, I think I have like only one full-time employee, so I would say I'm her mentor, sponsor, and coach. But I think it's difficult in small firms, and I think that there are some formal programs that are coming out. I think the CCA is launching one, we saw, and NAWA is launching one. There's different organizations. I know IABA has a mentorship platform, and through things like Mentor Click, there's a lot of these programs.
Right.
It's not specifically that anyone could go in and enroll in Mentor Click, but there's more infrastructure coming out that being created by these companies that I think makes mentorship programs more actionable, because that's the most difficult part, I think, especially once you leave a big firm environment, to set up a formal mentor, because you're talking to people a lot, but to convert that into a mentorship, there's that awkward hump that you have to get over. You're asking someone to do it. But I think for me, I definitely do look at my network a lot and try and figure out what types of things am I struggling with internally that I'm just having to make a call on, and could really use that feedback. And so far it's been really interesting as small firms. I think there's a lot of other small firms that have individuals working there or who have started their own one-person shop that have the same thought. So it's been actually pretty easy to find what I would consider peer mentors, of bouncing ideas off of. I think as small firms, generally there's enough business to go around, so people are more supportive than they are competitive, in my experience. So that's been really helpful, is finding others who go through the same thing every day. But I think identifying mentors outside of your firm would be really critical, would have been really nice for me when I was trying to decide whether what to do next. That would be helpful.
So maybe if we could bring up the last slide then.
Well, and Mary does have a story that I forgot to ask her to tell earlier about a client who was a mentor.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I can talk about that. So he was a mentor actually both when I was his consultant and then when I came into the organization. When I was a consultant, he was just really good at calling and saying like, hey, that last meeting, we probably should have focused a little more on this, a little less on that. Or he would just help me understand the culture, right? Like, we really need to make sure that you're always 6 weeks ahead on this particular deliverable, because it can never be late. I mean, he was just great at like just a little tap on the shoulder with hey, this is really important, or maybe you didn't understand this is what's going on. And when I joined the organization, again, big global company, he was very good at saying like, hey, I hear you wanted to do X, but you should call these 4 people who would seemingly not be involved in whatever it is I was thinking about doing. But I called them and found out, no, they were heavily involved and they were really important stakeholders that I just didn't understand enough to have realized I needed to reach out. Honestly, I would never have referred to him as a mentor until years later, when I realized like, oh, wow, yeah, very, very helpful to making sure that I succeed.
Great. All right. Yeah, if we could, so thank you so much. I just want to thank everyone on the panel, Jennifer, for sharing so much great knowledge. It's just wonderful to have you as a resource to help us out, and all of the perspectives shared by Jess and Mary and Adrienne. I found this super helpful. I hope our attendees did as well. Here's some additional resources, and Adrienne started going over some of these, so she's spot on. There are other actuarial organizations that allow you to network and perhaps find those mentor relationships that would exist outside of your firm, or just to find someone who coaches. I also like to call it my tribe of friends or women who are also work in the business, who know me well and can kind of provide that informal feedback when I'm trying to make important decisions, and they will be very honest and like, look, you're not good at that, Tanya. That's not going to be a good match, or you would be unhappy, or you need to just take the risk. Why are you still discussing this? This is obviously perfect. So it's important to have those friends, but you can also build your network through all of the organizations listed here. I did want to say there is one organization not listed because it's still being formed, that it's a very important one, and that is the Abacus, which is being formed by Sherry Chan and Yiling Lin, which will be for Asian actuaries. So look for that coming up as well. All of this, and also CCA mentoring initiatives are in the works. So just applaud to the CCA for sponsoring both this community and this webinar, or this session today on mentoring, and also for all that you do to help build that community within the consulting. It's been quite valuable to me and to others. So with that, I think we'll give you 5 minutes at the end of this, unless Jennifer has any closing remarks, or Shannon. No? No?
I do not. Thank you for the time. We appreciate it.
All right. Thank you. You guys have been awesome.
Thanks, everyone.
Everyone have a
Bye.
great rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.